fading? Okay. I have too much paper. I'm going to close down that. All right. Thank you very much. Today I am giving an overview of literature, Ifa Orisha literature for Trinidad and Tobago. As we know, much has been written about Cuba's Santeria, Brazilian Candomblé, Haiti, Voodoo, and to a lesser extent, the spiritual Shouter Baptist of Trinidad and Tobago. Also of importance, there is a need to investigate, research, and publications pertinent to the history, growth, and development of Ifa Orisha in Trinidad and Tobago. Consequently, this presentation attempts to provide an overview of the literature. The review seeks to examine past, present, and possible discourses on Ifa Orisha and how it has evolved on the island of Trinidad and Tobago. It is structured to a certain extent along a timeline focusing on pre-slavery, slavery, post-emancipation, and possibilities of future research and development of the Ifa Orisha way of life. My approach is the literature review as methodology and live experiences as an Ifa Orisha practitioner we employed to investigate this evolution. This approach identified appropriate, potent existing gaps and can be used to formulate apt theories and concepts, possible trends and relevant areas for research based on empirical and non-textual foundations. So, you can go ahead. I will not be using all the slides. That's just a basic outline. And to introduce the topic, I begin with a pretext quotation from Stewart, 2023. When we re-examine the process of knowledge production in the making of religion, with attention to multiple factors who produce and purvey oral, performed, scripted, and quoted knowledges, we find that custodians of African religious traditions in the Caribbean, those detached from academic institutions and scholarly guilds, are some of the most credible, and I repeat, are the most credible and skilled producers and interpreters of historical memory and African religious history. Let's go straight down to slide 6. So in terms of where did I find my information? Of course, in terms of the introduction, I work at UTT, so I searched the UTT Libraries catalog to begin with. I looked at Google Scholar, also general Google. I did a deep dive, went into the reference list and looked for things that were not obvious from the catalog or from the internet. I looked at seminal works, decolonization methodologies. Next slide. What I didn't include, what I didn't look at, and the whole body of literature that is yet to be examined, I didn't go to the Trinidad and Tobago archives. NALIS also has a West Indian Heritage Library. In searching that, I came across a bibliography of African Caribbean religions, proceedings of the 6th World Congress of Orisha Tradition and Culture that was held in 1999 in Port of Spain. Royal Gibbons and elders in the midst were very instrumental in putting on that conference, all right? I also didn't get a chance to go into UWI and look at what they have available in West Indiana, their special collections. You have a number of student projects, all right? And the brief references, I didn't get to that. So when we talk In terms of pretextual research, some people like to begin with the written. As we know, ours is an oral tradition. So I posit, and in some of the literature you would also see it, Ifo-Orisha research existed prior to formal scholastic documentation by Europeans at the turn of the 20th century, in the form of non-textual emancipatory celebrations. We have carnival, juve, camboulet, traditional masquerade, storytelling, proverbs, music, food, live practice, rituals, syncretism, right? According to Stewart, 2019, by the mid-1930s, Trinidadian Calypsonians began recording songs about the Yoruba religion, including Gerald Clark and the Kiskidi trios, Shango, Tigers, Yaraba Shango, Cobra's Shango Song, and Lord Caresa's Shango. Royal Lion also had Shango Dance in 1940. And here we are talking about the 30s and the 40s. So we see the literature there. The literature speaks to quite a number of pretextual recordings, so to speak. Could we go on to this? Right. So according to Trotman, 2017, the available documentary evidence does not reveal anything specific about the existence of religious practices among the enslaved population that could support claims for the existence of Orisha worship during the slave period. And even though we have no supporting literary or empirical evidence in terms of the pretext that I spoke about, we know that it existed. Some of us as devotees, through dreams, visions, readings, we go back. We have evidence that the Europeans would not have had. The people who like to write, and as far as they're concerned, the written word is gospel and nothing else exists. And that the Africans who came with tabula rasa, they didn't come with anything. We survived the Middle Passage, we survived the plantation, because it was coded. It was hidden, it was there. All right? So even though he didn't find any evidence, he went on to attempt to make a discussion on how the Yoruba people arrived in Trinidad and Tobago. So between 1838, and as you know, 1838 was the period post-emancipation after the apprenticeship period, and 1870, we first say it as the first period of settlement, right? Americans distinguish between the religious and the secular, and it should be noted that Yoruba people refused to be enslaved. It was a period of transplantation, homogenization, and syncretism, right? So most arrived post-emancipation with the arrival of Yoruba-speaking liberated. They were liberated indentured workers in the 19th century. Trotman went on to identify possible sources that he examined and what was recorded in the literature. The slave registration data, military records, rescued Africans, the cedulars of population 1783 and 1797, arrival from the different French islands, the Americans who came with the War of 1812, the Africans who were liberated from slave ships, because the European continued to go to Africa and plunder human cargo. Our ancestors, even after the abolition of the slave trade in the English-speaking Caribbean. Oyo had collapsed in the midst of the Civil War of 1793, so it was a free-for-all for the Europeans to go in and take Yoruba people and other African people. You also had mixed liberated African yards in St. Helena and Sierra Leone, right? So you had liberated Yoruba indentured laborers in the aftermath of emancipation coming to Trinidad. So this period 1870 to 1970. The period was marked by riots and rebellions, and we heard some of the earlier speakers refer to the Black Power movement, right? And of course, the different riots that occurred in Port of Spain, Aruca, San Fernando, right? So it was marked by riots, rebellions, and the beginning of legislation and criminalization of Orisha shouter, they were known as shouters, practices. To establish themselves and adapt to the new environment, syncretism was adopted. All right? So here we have a list of some of the legislation and criminalization. And of course, we refer to we, I say we without apology, indecent, barbaric Satanism, and devil worship. Right? According to Trotman, even before the legislation started, somebody ought to give me a fan. All I know is pre this and pre that. Let me get my, yeah. I need my rag. My apologies. They came from various parts of Yoruba land, from different political entities, although all in some differential relationship with Oyo, with various Yoruba dialects and often with different rituals. In Trinidad, they refashioned the religious practices they came with and created a religion that would be popularly known as Shango, and which reflected their specific needs as a transplanted people. So just in terms of legislation, the Summary Offences Act of 1921, and that much abused word, obia. Obia signifies, according to the definition, every pretended assumption of supernatural power or knowledge, whatever for fraudulent or illicit purposes, or for gain or for injury of the person. And it is good to get into the literature and the specifics of the legislation, so you will have a good understanding of some of the issues that we are facing right now and we're hearing about. It's because they wrote it, they put it down, they said these things about us. All right? Of course, according to Rockland 2012, and I rely very heavily on reviews, introductions, and prefaces. Rockland said, this reflects Protestant British colonial assumption that religions were self-evidently and naturally definable and separable, in large part on a textual basis. Here we go again. Religions were thought to produce books that constantly and coherently laid out the group's belief and rituals, the latter depending on the former. Since such texts defining the customary practice of spiritual baptism did not exist, it fell to the police to become the arbiters of customs as colonial anthropologists of religion. And we're seeing some repetitions, right? The police was left to interpret the law because we had no existing text. We had our oral traditions, right? So very quickly, I know time and I see the timekeeper there standing and okay. In terms of the early studies, right? No, go back up here. 1939. A lot of the early studies, the Herskovits, 1939, Michel, 1957, Simpson, 1962. They were predominantly anthropological, focusing on syncretism and Afro-religious practices derived from predominantly Catholicism. All right? So they conducted a number of studies, and each one quoted the other and whatnot, and they focused on the rituals, the customs, right? A seminal research. And according to Jobson 2023, a seminal research, but a significant omission is that Herskovits 1939. It failed to consider the impact of the oil and gas strike, protests, marches, the Butler riots of 1937 on the Afro-Trinidadians and other minority ethnic groups, which improved working conditions and wages and empowered workers, and it advanced the shout of faith also. Butler was a Baptist. Well, you know, he could have disappeared, right? Yeah, powerful man, right? So the research that Huskovitz did not, both of them, a man and husband and wife, it didn't treat that at all. So that's a significant omission. Okay? And we're going through because it's just an introduction, it's a preliminary look at it. Powers in Trinidad, Michelle, 1957. She went on in 1958 to do a PhD, a Shango religious group, and the problem of prestige in Trinidadian society. And we heard it from most of the speakers, prestige. Even then it was a problem, it remains a problem. I am not here to get into any individuals. I am not here to do that. The literature from 1959, she had 6 questions, treating with prestige in terms of her PhD research. So it described the group ethnographically, their rituals, the cosmology, the deities worship, and the like. So tales of insults, I'm quoting, an injury, particularly of blows to one's pride, were most common and persisted constantly. So she wanted to investigate and evaluate the possible paths or avenues towards prestige attainment, which are available to the lower class Negro. So this issue of prestige, and we know one of the tenets of IFA is humbleness. Ironically enough, counter to prestige, right, is humbleness. She had 6 questions. I could go on at length with that, I'm not. And then we had Simpson, 1962, the Shango cult in Nigeria and Trinidad, right? He was heavily reliant on Michelle. So it provides a comparative analysis of Shango Yoruba cults of southwestern Nigeria and of course Trinidad and Tobago. So you had comparisons again, they dealt with the deities, temples, the divination practices, and these can be investigated further. All right? He also identified the syncretism, what we would consider non-IFA practices now, where the Baptists would moan, your pointers, and no disrespect, the Bible, the Psalms, the hymns, by Shangoists and leaders, so there was a merging. Elder also in, did I omit J.D. Elder? Yeah. Elder in 1970, he did a seminal research on the Yoruba ancestral cult. No, stay up, go back up. Yeah, but go back up still. In Gasparillo, Structure, Organization, and Social Function, Community Life. And then Aegina and Gibbons, in 1999, they did one on Orisha traditions in Trinidad for that same 6 World Conference. All right? And you had a number of issues that they dealt with, all right? From the perspective of those who coordinated the exploration, Africans who were forcibly brought to the New World might not have recorded themselves in the logbooks of written history. They ingeniously recorded themselves in many other ways. They kept their memories of home alive in the ways they interpreted and related with their new homes at the level of religion, social behavior, economic institutions, and musical traditions. That's the quote, right? And at the end, they went on to look at the contributions that were made via Ifa Orisha believers and Ifa Orisha as a whole. It was interesting that the article makes no reference to Herskovitz, Michel's, or Samson's studies. I could go inside again and extrapolate on that quite a bit. And Mr. Gibbons, we could talk about that afterwards. When I saw it, I laughed. All right. Let's go on. Next slide, please. Quickly. Black Power movement. I won't spend too much time on this because it has already been spoken about to a certain extent. And with the advent of the Black Power movement, I have expansion of IFA via connections with Nigeria. Yeah. And we also have a lot of activism. There was the Orisha Youth Cultural Organization, representing young and earnest Black Power influenced Orisha enthusiasts who were likely latecomers to a tradition they had been taught to despise under colonial regime they no longer accepted. So Francis Henry, reclaiming African religions in Trinidad, she looked at the socio-political legitimation of the Orishan spiritual Baptist faith, right? So people like, Baba here, elders, Olaki Masatunji, right? Only my Yoruba is not my lingua franca and it's not my forte. Excuse any mispronunciation, please. Otun Iyalodu, Awo Akbaye, Ifakemi Aworeni, Valerie Stevenson Lichi, Eniyawa, the late Shango Yemi, Patricia McLeod of Isam. So these people came out of the Black Power movement. All right? In terms of Castor Spiritual Citizenship 2017, another seminal text, more recent. Spiritual citizenship is about the power of the sacred to inform new ways of belonging to community, the nation, and the transnational. So you start with yourself, as we said, your community, and then your nation. Right? Castor, according to Rockland 2019, Castor's work makes clear that certain colonial norms are reproduced in the post-colonial present, including by Ifa Orisha practitioner. But the focus of the book's analysis is mostly on liberation. Could we go ahead, please? Next slide. Next slide, please. This was also, the slide that went before is another transnational study. And in the interest of time, right, we would look at legislation post-Black Power. So coming out of the Black Power movement and a greater acceptance of Ifa Orisha devotees, and there was discussion before about the syncretism. The fact that there is an assumption that all the Afro-derived faiths, Shouter Baptists, Ifa people, that we are all the same. Ifa people in the house, we know better than that. Say yeah. Yeah, we know better than that. We went plenty. We didn't go to school. They put it on the DNA. When we leave Orun, they say, hey, Sandiford, you hold that. Go down there. Gibbons, hold that. Iyalodu, hold that. They ain't coming by me with that one. All right? So the Black Power. Coming out of the Black Power movement, we saw a number of positives. But even before, we had the government actions. And this is according to Francis Henry again. You had a repeal, and I'm just going through, of the Shelter Prohibition Act in 1951, registration and incorporation of 2 Orisha groups in 1981, visit of the Uni in 1989, and he visited shrines, enthronement of Molly Ahi as head of Opa Shango in 1991, PNM government gives the Orisha religion a public festival day of celebration in 1995, UNC grants the Spiritual Baptist to Shouters a national holiday, 30th of March every year. Both religions given land at Maloney, 25 acres shared among 5 groups. Deeds of ownership to the land given in 2000. The passage of the Orisha Marriage Act in 1999. Ila Orisha Melvina Rodney given a Hummingbird Award at the Independence Day celebration in 2000. Regulations to the Marriage Act are written. And the first marriage officer granted a license in March 2001. Now, some of what I'm reading, remember that PowerPoint is just a tip of the iceberg, right? So, a lot has been done in terms of legal clearance. Baba Ogun come left, right, clear road, legally. All of them who don't like we, think they like we, feel they like we, don't want to like we. Left, right, cutlass, machete. All you don't know now, Yagbamola would have a thing she just say, who no. Only what our ancestors went through for us to be here today. So the legislation exists, we need to activate it. Alright? So we're looking at the past, we're looking at the history through the literature. Next slide, please. And it would be remiss of me if I didn't include a seminal researcher in terms of Ifa Orisha traditions in Trinidad and Tobago, Professor Maureen Lewis. Right? Sabab. The volume of literature that has been produced by this woman is phenomenal. And when you look at the type of primary research, very detailed, specific, what they call it, granular. That's a nice word for it. Collis Bartholisi, and I don't know if I have her name right, writing a review on Warner Lewis's work, and I have to quote it. Guinea's other sons signify that I and people like me have a history that exceeds the instrumentalization of slavery. The passage was meant to collapse ethnic and religious difference, to erase any memory of the enslaved and her descendants outside the site of labor, so that the sea would become a repository of our history, its monuments, battles, and martyrs. Warner Lewis points to the complex and rich history of those who came from Africa. Right? Warner Lewis mined the clues from oral history to show us that while some African ancestors survived in the 17th century, others came late into the 19th. Some more recent arrivals would trace their roots to Yoruba, others to Hausa. Some were royal, others were not. No, all of us were not kings and queens people. This was not the romanticized and rhetorical, romanticized abstraction that we all descend from kings and queens. Right? Through meticulous field research, interviews with descendants, archival research, and a facility with Yoruba, Warner Lewis sketches out fuller pictures of who some of us were and how we had come to be in Trinidad. Places like Belmont, Laventon, and other parts of East Trinidad, where many of those late Africans' arrivals settled, were recognized as vital, intelligence, intellectual, and spiritual spaces. Tunapuna, Manzanilla, Cap, China, Sobo Village gained new significance under Warner Lewis's eye. The other side of Belmont, the East Dry River behind the bridge, where my father's people had settled, was a somewhere of great men and women and musical invention and creativity. Belmont, once called Freetown Valley for its popularity among Africans, was a place of freedom for the drums, calypso, and steel band. This book is not so much, and that's the other book, Guinea's Other Son. This book is not so much a documenting of African retention in Trinidad as an argument for the continuous relationship between the African and Caribbean presence. So we see Maureen Warner, and I have a list if you're really interested, how she uses language, ethnography, right, to tell the story of Trinidad and Tobago. Next slide, please. Right. Next slide. Next slide. Right? So, we have 3 slides of Maureen Warner Lewis. That speaks to the volume of work. And I think I may have omitted some. I looked at 2 other key writers, Diane M. Stewart and Tracy E. Husk, and they have written extensively on Obia, Orisha, and religious identity in Trinidad. There are 2 volumes, right? Volume 1 frames identify as a black response to colonial racecraft, the practice skill of racial hatred and punishment of blackness, a white colonial response to a perceived racial threat by blacks enslaved or otherwise. Volume 2, themes presented in the 2 volumes set are arranged historically, right? And of course, they provide an unfolding portrait of Obeah and Orisha in Black Trinidad and Tobago. Volume 2 takes the historical foundation of Obeah and Orisha into the 20th century. This second volume connects well an Obeah of colonial times to one associated with a growing nationalism within the context of liberation movements. Next slide, please. So we see, I call the 2000s the present, and I put in a little quotation mark, because coming out of that 6th World Conference in 1999, the Black Power movement, and there was an upsurge in publication. And I identified 21 publications, which doesn't include Warner Lewis, Stewart, and Huss, right? Dealing with a variety of topics. And here I did a listing of them alphabetically, not by year. And I just did a loose categorization of the different themes that are dealt with. So you had an upsurge, right? And then you had internet, remember the 2000 bug, the millennium, internet, globalization, more access, networking. You also had free education. Some people underestimate the impact of the junior and secondary schools. I went to 5 Rivers, yeah. I wasn't supposed to succeed, they told me that. I could tell that's the next book, right? So we have that. And then you had, so you had different topics in terms of music, right? And if you notice here, we have Alacron, Bazinet. He did his PhD, right? Could we scroll down, please? So slides 20 to 24, Steel Pan, Calypsonian, and Mysticism, Dr. Francis from UTT did something on shadow there. Scroll down, please. Just to give you an idea of the, scroll down, again, right? So what, go back up, right. So what did the literature review, what did it locate? Right? It located, I can see, right? The research focused primarily on Trinidad and not Tobago, right? It also identified the fact that there's a paucity of research on Ifa Orisha in Trinidad and Tobago, right? No research on New Age information and communication technology. I see. Go back up. Let me see. Right, okay. Looking strange. All right. No research on New Age information and ICT on Ifa Orisha. And of course, it identified that prestige is still prominent. Right? Some of the topics dealt with: anthropology, syncretism, legislation, history, language, possession, music, performing arts, women and Ifa, identity, comparative analysis. And there's an interesting one by Dr. Fitzpatrick on sexuality. Could we go on to the next slide, please? So, in terms of future research, there's a text by Smith, research projects and proposals, some of which overlap and some of which intersect in terms of decolonized methodology. And she treats with 25 projects in terms of First Nation people, which are applicable to us as Ifa Orisha devotees, in terms of what we can research and how to go about understanding the research that we need to do, and what we can add to the body of existing literature. Right? Claiming land titles, testimonies, storytelling, celebrating survival, remembering, not romanticizing, indigenizing, intervening, revitalizing, reading, writing, representing, gendering, envisioning, reframing, restoring, returning, democratizing, and networking. Could you scroll down, please? Naming, rename, next slide. Protecting language, customs, all right, and negotiating. So in terms of, and I just kind of brainstorm here, this needs some fine tuning. In terms of research going forward, and what has been observed in the literature, we have a lot of work to do. The role and function of the IOCTT in a digital age, contemporary primary research. What has happened since Eugene and Gibbons and that 6th World Conference? No, it's too large. Yeah. What's the impact to date? We can look at IFA research again in terms of decolonized methodology, cultural demythologizing, where Chatur and others are using Line Old Talk as methodology. Of course, we still have to investigate further music, dance, possession, language, IFA Orisha role, and I think somebody is speaking about that later on in resolving social issues in Trinidad and Tobago. Next slide, please. In terms of future research also, how far has IFA Orisha and TNT moved from early anthropological studies? All right? How it has evolved in Trinidad vis-a-vis Tobago, IFA Orisha Tobago, IFA unification, big T, feasts versus festivals, right? IFA Orisha has been synchronized with other religions, but we're not seeing other religions borrowing from us. Why is that? IFA Orisha, the Rada community, the public holiday, IFA Orisha pedagogy, mainstream curriculum, artificial intelligence, social media, film, and all you know, Madame Maureen Lewis requires her own conference. Just trust me. Right? I think, scroll up, let me see here, and I have some references listed there. So there is a quick and rough and ready overview. I see my timekeeper, I stopped seeing him at one time, I don't know. Right? What I've also compiled is a bibliography, both a straightforward bibliography and an annotated bibliography of the research located. Adukwe Lopo Lopo, Ireol.